right, I'm back to answer more of your questions. Let's dive in. I recently saw a post about Daryl's face scar and how we still don't know how he got it, but it seems he got it during his time with Leah. I was curious if you had a theory about this and the purpose of giving him his scar but not explaining where it came from. It has to have some significance since they make Norman sit through makeup for it every episode they film. Agreed on that last part. I do think that they are going to explain it at some point. Just because they haven't yet doesn't mean they won't. I mean, obviously there's still a lot going on with Daryl, and I do think that it will probably be explained when Beth shows up. The reason that I think that I don't have a particular theory for how he got it, but it's more the symbolic nature of it that really makes me think it's going to be tied to Beth in some way. For one thing, it's over his eye, and that makes it serious symbolism. So I'll find a picture of this, but you know how when you have a serious symbol, like outside the show, I mean, even like the dog for the radio, Sirius XM and all of that, they tend to have an X or a star over the eye. And it's because it's to show that the dog lost the eye. I mean, the Sirius symbol is a one-eyed dog. And obviously, Daryl didn't lose his eye, but the scar seems to suggest that somebody was swiping at his eye with a knife or something, like maybe they were trying to gouge out his eye. And just having the scar that way almost makes it look a little bit like a one-eyed dog, like the X over the eye or something like that. So I just think that that's not a coincidence. And what does it mean? It could be just to remind us of the serious symbolism. You could argue maybe it's to make Daryl a serious character himself. Because, I mean, theoretically, especially in terms of Carol, he left and then disappeared, and now she's looking for him. So to her, he's kind of the missing character. But it also could just be to remind us of the serious symbolism, and also not a coincidence that happened during his time with Leah, because she was a love interest for him, and we talked all the time about how she was kind of the anti-Beth. So again, I just think it's all entangled somehow. It's hard to pin down exactly what they're going for with it or exactly what it means, but I think it's all relevant. The other thing is that the first time we see the scar in Find Me, he's wrapping up a knife in some paper, and we're not sure what that's about. But then the dog comes running up behind him. So we actually do have a dog in the scene where we first see that scar. And again, it's just all serious symbolism. It's all entangled. And I do think that eventually we will figure out what it means and what they're going for with that. But given that they didn't explain it in the flagship show and that it's all tangled up in serious symbolism, I do think that it will probably be revealed and explained when Beth shows up, or in conjunction with her showing up somehow. So that is my current theory on that. I don't have anything more specific, but I am interested for sure to see what they say about it and where they go with it. So hopefully we'll get that soon. Thank you. Okay. Do you think Beth might have stopped by Omaha before the CRM destroyed it and before Michonne and Nat arrived there? It got me wondering if one of EK's songs, Omaha Hotel, gives off major Beth and TD vibes because of how gentle the melody of the song is, which is a lot like Beth's character, and not to mention that the videography of her lyrics music video feels very much like TWD's flagship intro credits. We already know that Last Chance and Mess is about Beth's POV and feelings towards Daryl, so it wouldn't be entirely far-fetched that Omaha Hotel is another song of Beth's POV and her journey post-Coda. What do you think? My name's Liesel, and I'll spell it for you guys on here because, yeah, it's got a wonky spelling, but it's not Leslie. So, yeah, I absolutely think that this is a thing. Just the fact that we know she has put hints in the music before, that she's sang very openly, songs about TWD before, and all of that, yeah, I 100% think that it's a hint. I don't know what it means in the show. We could speculate about a lot of things, that she was in Omaha, that she's part of the CRM, which was controlling Omaha and then destroyed it. I mean, yeah, it could mean just about anything in terms of the plot, but I think it's a major hint that the Omaha storyline, which is very much entangled with the CRM, she's hinting at that and that she will be part of that in some way. So yeah, 100%. I agree with everything that you said here. And, her most recent song, B or C for Effort, also features her kind of looking like she died and then having her wake up at the end and sit up in exactly the same way she did in Slabtown at the hospital. So I do very, very much think that she's putting hints into her music. And so those are always fun to find and fun to kind of try and interpret. So yeah, I haven't thought about Omaha Hotel in a long time. And yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to say, but I agree. And yeah, just thanks for sending that in. I think that that's something we should continually revisit until she shows up again. How does EK sleep at night, having to keep Beth's true fate and her journey after Coda a secret for so many years at this point? Or better yet, how does the powers that be, specifically Scott Gimple, breathe and live life peacefully, knowing they left us off with Beth getting shot in the head in Grady and staying silent or avoiding answering questions regarding her for years? So I kind of have two answers to this. One is they probably sleep better than you think they do. I don't think it bothers them all that much. But the other thing is that, and I'll unpack that a little bit more in just a second, but the other thing is that they don't really have a choice, okay? Emily is under contract. She has to do what they tell her to do. So even if it's killing her and she wants to tell us, she still can't. In terms of Gimple, I mean, I understand what you mean. Like, it would probably freak me out if I was him, and just the fact that so many people, were angry about it, and plenty of people stopped watching the show over it, things like that. Yeah, I think that would bother me. But at the same time, Gimple's kind of cool as a cucumber. I don't think it bothers him that much. And he is beholden as well to AMC. So we've discussed before that he was basically told, from what we can gather, that he had to get through the comic book storylines before he could go branch off into anything that was his own. So I think he had permission to do the Beth and Daryl storyline in season 4 and season 5, but he was told you cannot really explore that until, or anything else that he wanted to do. Like, the CRM is his too. The CRM is not in the story or in the comic books. So he couldn't really explore that stuff until after all the comic book material had been presented on the show. So I think he was probably told that early on, like maybe even way before season 4. And so he went to them. This is just kind of my opinion, the way that I'm envisioning it. He went to the studio and just said, okay, I get it. And I will go through all of the comic book material, but can I please just start setting it up, like throwing in little hints and, kind of set it up a little bit. And then, especially Beth, I'm going to take her away, and then we'll go through all of the comic book stuff, and then we'll go back to that, So I think that was always his plan, and he did get permission to do that. But bottom line, once again, he is beholden to the studio. And so he can't do anything that he wants to do that's different than what they say, So I think they're behind him 100% and they back him up. But the plan was always to keep it a secret until she came back. And so even if at some point he did have doubts and want to change that, I don't know that they would let him. But going back to what I said first, you also have to realize that maybe even more than actors, writers, it is their job to make people feel things, and they don't always have to be good things, right? Take someone like Stephen King, who writes horror novels. Anytime he horrifies someone or frightens them or makes them cringe or anything like that, trust me, he is just filled with boyish glee about that, okay? Because that is what writers do. They try to make people feel things through their stories. So even though they got a lot of anger and they got a lot of sadness and they even got a lot of hatred for it, that is proof to them that they're doing their job correctly. So like I said, I don't think it bothers them all that much. And I think in a lot of ways, Gimple had to be very, very skilled at the way he brought across Beth and Daryl's romance, because everything was going to ride on that, knowing that they wouldn't be able to explore it for many years. So he had to bring that across in a powerful enough way that when he brings her back, all those people who loved it back in season 4 will come back. And he's banking on that. And I don't think he has a ton to worry about. I mean, yeah, there might be some people that are just disinterested after all these years, but that is a powerful lasso for the audience to say, you thought she was dead, He lost her this many years ago. He has never had, well, he hasn't never had a love interest. He only had one, and nobody liked her, and she was toxic anyway, so clearly she was not the one he was meant to be with. Now this woman is back. I mean, trust me, that's going to draw a lot of numbers. And yeah, it is 100% a risk. It is 100% a gamble to do that. But I think it's where Gimple thrives. And so... And, I think we can all agree that they brought across the story very, very well in season 4 and season 5. And that's why it was the height of Walking Dead being watched. It was why all the Spoon campaign happened. It's why TD was formed at all. It's why there was a massive, massive, massive backlash after Coda. Okay, because he made the audience feel stuff. And most of that audience will come back when she returns. And that's why I think it's such a big deal. I think that's why... and we've talked about maybe they didn't think it would be this many years. Maybe it's taken longer. I mean, you had things like COVID pushing it back and just, writer strikes and all kinds of things. But even so, I think at the end of the day, once it all comes out, I think it's going to, for the most part, work out exactly like they wanted. And I don't think they have a whole lot of remorse about doing it that way. And I don't know if that offends some people or not, but you got to understand when writers write stories, part of writing stories is tragedy. Part of writing stories is unrequited love. Part of writing stories, it's just making people feel emotions, both the negative and the positive. And you can't feel the full range of a positive emotion unless you felt the full range of the negative emotion, right? So it's going to be, in other words, so much more powerful when she comes back because she was gone so long, because he had so much heartache when he lost her, because the audience felt that same heartache through him. We live vicariously through these stories and we feel the things that the characters feel. And that's why there was such a huge backlash, because everybody felt Daryl's sadness like it was their own, and they felt Beth's loss as though we had lost someone we really loved, even though she's a fictional character. And so when she comes back and when there's a reunion, when they finally get their romance, it's going to be so much more powerful than any other romance has been on the show, even though we may love them, because there wasn't such a negative, tragic aspect to the others, but there was to this one. So anyway, just keep that in mind. I'm sure you want to hear that they feel really bad about doing this to their fans. And I'm sure they do. They're not trying to cause anyone pain for the most part. But at the same time, this is what they do. And this is their job. And I just don't think that they're sitting around losing sleep over it. I really don't think they are. So I don't know if that's what you want to hear or not. But I just always keep focused on what's coming and that it will be really, really wonderful when it gets here. Alrighty. Can you explain and elaborate further on the meaning and symbolism of Coda and its connection to Beth? So there are a lot of different meanings for what a coda is. It is the end of a piece of music. Let me pull up some definitions here, and that way I can kind of work off that. So the concluding passage of a piece of music, typically forming an addition to the basic structure. So on the one hand, this makes sense it made sense as being her final episode, because a coda is very often considered to be the end of a piece of music. So everyone went, oh, okay, well, that's like the end of Beth. So it just kind of made sense. The only way I would say that doesn't make sense is because giving us that title made it, if it really were her death and she was not coming back, it's kind of a spoiler. It would be like, I don't know, like if they called an episode where Daryl was going to die the end of the crossbow or something. I mean, because obviously they didn't call it the end of Beth or just the end in general, because that could mean anyone. But Coda is musical, right? And so it was saying like the end of the music. And that has to be Beth. And so it's like, it was kind of a spoiler to do that if that was really what they were doing. So that's the only reason that's like the main thing that I don't think that if she had really died in that episode and wasn't coming back, I don't think they would have called it Coda, because it would have been too obvious what was going to happen. The other thing to pay attention there is that it says forming an addition to the basic structure. So a coda is very often outside the main structure of the musical piece. And so that very much feels like Beth's story in that, we talk about how she was the only one who didn't follow the tracks to Terminus. She crossed over the tracks. And Daryl did it first too, but then when he found Rick and Michonne, he followed the tracks too. So Beth is the only one that didn't do that. And her story is like outside of the main narrative. And that's why they took her away, and, we didn't see her because they were focused on the main narrative, but they'll jump to that Coda at some point and tell her story. Now, the other thing a Coda can be, that definition that I just read is sort of talking about the actual passage of music, which is called the Coda. But when you have a Coda sign in a piece of music, it is also just called the Coda. So very often what you do when you're playing a piece of music, and there's DSL codas, DCL codas, it just has to do with music theory, and I don't want to go into all of that. It's complicated if you don't know how to read music. But the point is, sometimes you can go through a piece of music exactly as it's written one time, and then it'll repeat. You repeat, go back to the beginning, and then you go until you hit the coda. There will be a coda sign above the musical bar, and when you go through it the second time and hit that, you skip over the music until you get to the coda, which is the concluding piece. Okay, so we can also be talking about, in terms of Beth's storyline, we're skipping over it. So when you hit that coda, then you have to jump over the main narrative until you actually get to the coda piece, right? So what we were, as the audience, seeing was just that main narrative, but Beth's story particularly skipped over that and will pick up again after the main piece as an addition to the main piece. You see what I mean? So she's both the coda and the coda symbol, and her storyline is the coda, in that you were playing along with the main part of the music at first. Her storyline was part of the main storyline at first, but then it diverged, right? And so we kept seeing the main storyline, but once we obviously didn't skip over the main storyline. We saw it all. But from her point of view, if you were to skip over that main narrative, her story is going to pick up right after that. So that's another way that we see her story being a coda. And so it's like, try to think of it this way, like, the writers are bopping along in the story, and Beth's story is, she's with Team Family, so her story is part of the main narrative, just like everyone else's. And then they hit that point, and the writers are going, coda. Like, they're telling us that. This is the coda. Meaning, her story is going to diverge, skip over the main narrative. We're not going to see her during the main narrative, which is the comic book material. But then we'll hit the coda again when we see her again, and then her story will pick up from there. You see what I mean? So, the fact that they called it coda, they could always just point at it and say, oh, it just means a concluding piece of music. And it does mean that, so they're not lying, but that's not all it means. It can also mean something else, and they're telling us this is the point at which her story diverges from the others. And so that's why they're saying coda here. Well, now we've finally gotten to a point where certainly all the comic book material has been told. I do believe that originally we might have seen Beth in the first season of Daryl Dixon, but when Melissa had to back out, that changed the story. So they just used the first season to establish Daryl in France and kind of have fun doing his story. And, I really do think that we're going to see her in season 2. Now that Melissa's back on board, I 100% feel like this is going to be a replay of Consumed, and it's going to lead to Beth, period. And I'll be interested to see when she shows up, if they call the episode something to do with the coda again, if they call it DCL coda, or I don't know, if they come up with any other musical term, it'll be really interesting. So I hope that helps. I know that it can be a little bit confusing, especially to those who do not play music or read music a lot, but Beth was the musical character, so they're using the musical structure as a metaphor for her entire arc. She is the musical part of the arc. And so clearly the coda will always refer to her. Anyway, so I hope that's a little bit clear. I feel like anytime I try to describe it or explain it, I don't do it very well and people get confused. But you can also look into musical theory or just look up multiple definitions of the word coda. In fact, let me see. I know that there was a few others that sometimes we come across sort of archaic definitions that people don't always think of. And then it's like, oh, I didn't realize that was a meaning for coda, The other thing that we maybe should touch on here is that CODA as an acronym, CODA, stands for Child of Deaf Adults. And there was a movie that came out a while ago that was called that was about the deaf community. And AMC supported it and played trailers for it. And we wondered if they specifically did that because it's called CODA. Now, in that case, it's not necessarily linked to the musical definition, But it's also really interesting that we have Connie and Kelly, who are part of the deaf community and sign, that Daryl learned to sign, and that Connie was used really heavily as a proxy for Beth. So I don't know if that is something that they did on purpose, AMC, or not. I think it very well could be. So that's just another thing to keep in mind, that there's more than one kind of coda. And I mean, in terms of like, if they were using that rather than the musical definition for Beth, you could maybe argue that she was not going to be heard for a long time, and that's why they did that. Personally, I think they were mostly going for the musical definition, but we know that Gimple operates on many levels, so it could be more than one thing. So here's a few other definitions. A concluding part of literary or dramatic. The other thing was, in terms of whether it is concluding a storyline, again, I don't think it's that Beth is dead and not returning, but you could argue that it's the concluding part of her first arc and who she was back then, because we're always talking about how she will come back stronger, more of a warrior, more mature as a character, all of that. So it's like the concluding piece of her first arc, or the first part of her arc. And when she comes back, it'll be a whole new thing or something. Like, symbolically, you could see it that way. And then something that serves to round out, conclude, or summarize, and usually has its own interest. Again, just kind of pointing to the idea that her arc is going to be her own. Let's see. So I'm not seeing a whole lot more that's jumping out at me, although similar words like synonyms for coda can be, they have things like accompaniment, conclusion, postlude, afterword, epilogue, and those are all kind of ending words. What that means. Follow-up, finale. So yeah, just kind of interesting to think about, what this word kind of means. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. All right, I've gone a little bit over time for this one, so we will stop there, and I will be back soon with more. I hope that these are helping you guys. And thank you for the questions. Keep them coming. Bye.